Tara, you've said you're 100% sure we can communicate after death. What's been the most undeniable sign that you've received?
I think I just really want to make it clear that I've said that I'm 100% sure that it's happening for me. I can't speak for generally, whether I can't say 100% sure about, whether it happens in general. But in my experience, I have been able to get to a point of receiving signs from my husband who's passed away. There are so many, Doug, honestly, and, obviously they're in the book, a lot of them, not all of them. But I think maybe the one that is the biggest one happened actually this year on Valentine's Day. Um, my husband was a stickler for cards, Valentine's, Easter, Christmas, birthdays, anniversaries. And my friends have been amazing and, really taken care of me. And I met up with two friends on Valentine's Day, and then I was going home in the evening. And even though I'd had a lovely day, I just felt a bit sad that I was going to an empty home. And so in the way that I've learned to do, in my mind, I said to my husband, please send me a sign for Valentine's Day. And then I heard a sports car coming up from behind my Uber. And it was a very familiar sound of car that my husband used to have. And as it went past, I noticed that it was red. And I thought, well, he didn't like red sports cars. Actually, for Valentine's Day, that's quite appropriate. And then I just had this feeling like I need to see the registration plate of that car. I just had a feeling it would have his initials on it, which are RB for Robin Bieber. And but that car had sped away. I was stuck in traffic. It was almost never going to happen. But somehow we caught up with the car, and I saw the license plate, and it was C21RBN. So I took a photo of it, sent to my assistant because I always share my signs with her. And she said RBN is phonetically Robin, so it's even stronger than just RB. And then we were trying to work out what C21 might mean, and we didn't really think it was anything. And then suddenly she was like, wasn't he born in Canada on the 21st of September? And I mean, I was just like, I'm shaking. This is so specific. And I've received lots of other signs like his initials or his birth dates showing up on my phone, or feathers or little robin birds. But I'd say that was the biggest one.
And to provide some more context for the listeners, the viewers, your husband battled leukemia, right? And then he unfortunately passed away. And this has been your way of staying connected to him.
Yeah. So basically, he was vulnerable with an underlying condition. So I had to shield him during the pandemic. And then just as it was kind of officially ending, his condition developed into acute myeloid leukemia. And the condition was brutal. The treatment was really brutal as well. And he was in hospital for half of the 4 months that he had left to live. So, that was a time of adversity for us. And then obviously I was left alone as a widow in my 40s with a life ahead of me that was going to be totally different to the one that I had imagined. And then I had to overcome that adversity on my own. And one of the things that's brought me comfort and guidance, and now I would even say joy, is this ability to communicate with him. But there are also lots of other things that kind of went around that helped me, to deal. And I love the name of your podcast because I really do feel that I'm coming through this with, some skills that are better than I ever had before. Just, everything from my appreciation for nature and beauty to understanding how creativity can be really healing, totally appreciating the support of having a community around me of people that, would sort of not just take care of me like an ordinary friend, but really buy into this idea of signs and send me pictures when they receive things and, just make me feel really safe to have that conversation.
And so what are some of the common ways that you communicate with your husband now?
So the most common one for me is if I ask a question in my mind, then I get an answer really quickly, and it's not necessarily an answer that I would have given myself. So I feel strongly that those answers are coming from him. But the other thing is more random. One day I opened my front door to step out, and there was just a perfect white feather lying on the doorstep. I tend to see a lot of hearts and infinity symbols, so like the number 8 on its side, or just, angel numbers as well. So in the source, in the dedication, I had written that he was my best friend, my husband, and my twin flame. And if you believe in angel numbers or numerology, then 11 is the number of twin flames, or some people would say soulmates. And so I see 11 a lot, and a lot of people do. But then I started seeing 44, and I didn't know what it meant. So I looked it up, and it's supposed to mean that your angels are guiding you. And there were times where I felt so lost and I didn't know how to navigate life. And I kept seeing 44. And to me, that's, if possible, that's his way of saying that he's around and I am on the right path and I, need to just keep going.
That's really cool that you've not only like used this adversity to your advantage, but you have the self-awareness to like pay attention to these signs and then the intuition to like follow those signs. And I think a lot of people have trouble with this. I know we talked about this in our first podcast together about like how do you get through adversity with resilience. I'd love to like kind of revisit that. Like you just provided a beautiful example of how you're doing that. Like how, generally speaking, based on what you learned as a neuroscientist and studying this stuff, like how can people go through like a traumatic event or some form of adversity and actually come out on the other side with new skills, with being a better version of themselves?
I really want to acknowledge that I thought a lot about your story whilst I was going through the last few years. And I thought about the commonalities, how you had people around you that challenged your thinking and kind of like helped you to get on the right path. And for you, I know that you use exercise very much as a way of overcoming adversity. And I didn't feel like I could do high intensity exercise. I felt like my nervous system was so dysregulated that I needed for me to keep it really gentle. So I did walks in nature, but they got longer and longer. And I think that both the walking and the immersion in nature were things that really helped me. But I'd just like to go back a little bit and say that the first thing is that I feel, and I've learned, and the research backs it up, that, you really need to feel the emotions that come along with whatever adversity you're going through, and trying to like suppress them or avoid them or numb them, whether that's through food or drugs or alcohol or throwing yourself, into work. If you do try to avoid them in any way, I think people will pay for that later, because these, sort of emotions that haven't been dealt with, that haven't healed fully, it's going to sort of psychologically affect you later in your life. So the first thing I think is to really go wherever you have to go, to the depths of emotion. And then the things around that really helped me, the main two would be nature, as I just mentioned. So time in nature, and my community of people that really supported me. And I'm very aware that not everybody has a massive supportive community. So it's ways of finding that, whether it's support groups, whether it's volunteering. It doesn't need to be a large number of people, but I think as you will attest to as well, it helps to have like the right, good people around you that can help guide you when you feel really lost. And through nature, I also honed the art of noticing. So it's easy to walk through nature and maybe be listening to a podcast at the same time. So you're actually kind of multitasking and you're not really necessarily noticing. What I started to do was really cultivate this art of appreciating beauty and having awe for nature. So I would look at, beautiful spring blossoms or beautiful fall leaves, and I would listen to bird song and really actually pay attention to these things. And that led to me just more during a day, naturally saying like, oh, look how beautiful that is. Or I just noticed, that sound, and definitely like tuning into my senses more than I ever had when I was just rushing through life and trying to get stuff done. And then I think when you tune into your senses, then although intuition isn't, strictly speaking, defined as a sense, it is another modality that you can use to make decisions, to interact with life, to make plans for the future. So yeah, I really dug into like building up those senses and modalities that I already had, but I kind of either felt I lost or wasn't really paying full attention to in normal life.
I appreciate you sharing the thing about my story helping you. Like, I had no idea, and thanks for the kind words. Um, it really does mean a lot, and I appreciate your openness and vulnerability with all this. And I think that you know tying in what you just said to what I think a lot of people struggle with is you talk about the art of noticing and trusting your intuition. I think that when people are in the thick of a super stressful situation, they can't figure out what's right from wrong. They can't figure out what's the next right move. They can't figure out like where to go from here because their nervous system is so like locked up. Like what's the right move for somebody when they are like in the thick of it and yet they want to figure out like what's the next right move I got to make.
Yeah, so that's a really great question because I sort of had to figure that out for myself. I do think that having people around you, whether it's talking therapy or just friends to kind of bounce ideas off when you do feel very confused is helpful. But the biggest thing I learned is that we try to rationalize it. We try to figure it out in our heads. But actually, the best way to really be guided by your own hidden wisdom is to get into your body. So any form of movement, and if we go back, I like to go back to ancient times, ancient wisdom. So things like dancing, drumming, chanting, humming, breath work is really, really helpful when your nervous system is kind of like out of your control and you don't know where to go mentally. That, the best way to regulate your nervous system, one of the best ways is through breath work. Things like yoga and dance are also ways to kind of like unlock wisdom that might be held in your body that you can't actually get to sort of like articulate through speech or mental means. And for example, there's actually a charity called Ashes to Art, where firefighters who go into really traumatic scenes, as soon as they exit that, they have to like paint or draw what they've seen. And that's a way of processing their emotions. So I would say the biggest thing that I learned to do differently, because I'm a big fan of talking therapy, and I did have that during my grief, is all the physical ways that we can access our own intuition and really appreciate our own resilience and that we can lean on ourselves even at times where we feel like mentally we can't figure out what to do.
I know you've talked about that you believe we have more than five senses. Talk about how like you came to this conclusion and then which ones are the best for like spotting out like the next right move in life and how to achieve success.
Yeah, so everyone knows about the five senses. And actually, having been to medical school, I did know that there were more. So for example, we have pain, the sense of pain, which is called nociception, the sense of temperature, which is called thermoception. We have, one of the five is taste, but taste is actually subdivided into five. So bitter, sweet, salty, sour, and umami. But umami was only discovered in the 1980s. So, even within our lifetimes, new senses have been discovered. And for example, now the immune system is actually recognized as one of our senses. So in a literature review that I did across the year that I was writing, I ended up making a table of 34 senses. So the first scientific paper I had read said it's possible that humans have 22 to 33 senses. But as I gathered more research, I ended up with 34. And of course, there are other senses that humans don't have, but other animals have. So for example, dolphins and bats have echolocation, which means that they use sonar to work out how far away things are around them because of the bouncing back of sound. And interestingly, dogs and even cats have a much greater sense of smell than we do. There's a very famous nurse. Her first name was Joy. I can't remember her surname right now, but she had something called hyperosmia, which means that she could smell more sensitively than the average person. And so like cats and dogs, she could actually smell impending disease and even death. So as we're dying, cells die off in a certain order, and that gives off an odor. And this is the reason that cats and dogs in like people's own homes or in sort of like, care of the elderly homes will go and sit near people who are about to die. Now, so, basically there are senses that, as far as we know, humans don't have. So if we think about migrating birds, they have something called magnetoreception, which is how they use magnetism to navigate, long journeys around the globe. As far as we know, humans don't have some of those senses, but it's interesting that there's this, one nurse that has an acute sense of smell. And it makes me think, well, why couldn't you have that? Or I have that? Or do you have an, acute sense of another kind that maybe that lady didn't? So to me, the whole question is about expanding what we think we're capable of, with particularly, from my point of view, through our brains. So, it might just be that there are senses that we can hone and become better at. For example, we know that people who are blind, the visual cortex of the brain gets reorganized to heighten other senses. So they may have, a better sense of hearing, for example. And it was kind of that just led me to think, like, can I build up my intuition? Can I expand my consciousness to maybe learn how to communicate or receive signs from beyond? And that's the journey that I've been on. And that's, what I've felt that I've been able to do. But I just encourage other people to think, what is it that they could grow and expand in their life that would help them either overcome adversity or just, have a better version of life than what they have at the moment.
I would love to come back to like this part of our conversation in a second and talk more obviously about like intuition, overcoming adversity, resilience and stuff like that. But first, like, what was the process like for you with somebody that, talks about stress and resilience, and then you have like your husband pass away, and we know that like the longest study on happiness shows that like romantic relationships are the most important thing for overall happiness in the human experience. Like what was that process like for you of coming to terms with what you've studied and what you knew and realizing like how much this was going to impact your life?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was a huge loss and totally devastating and really difficult to make sense of for a very long time. I think the place that I've come to now is that for reasons that I still don't fully understand, I've had to accept that that was his journey and that's affected my life, obviously. I'm just so grateful that I had the love and the relationship that I had. We met kind of later in life, so we really cherished each other. And actually, because of the pandemic, we got to spend a year and a half just alone together 24/7. And it was kind of like being on honeymoon. So I got that quality time with my husband that we don't always normally get. And yes, I've lost, sorry. Yes, I've lost his physical presence in my life. And that does leave a huge gap in my life. But I have, managed to get a lot of comfort from the fact that I believe that in some sense he's still around me. He's still guiding me. There's a bond that will never be broken in one way. But that also, gets me to a point almost 4 years later now where it's given me the strength to move forward with my life, to re-engage with my career, to, re-engage with my social life and just, believe in the beautiful potential of the future.
A lot of what you've talked about in content, podcast interviews is about stress and how to like rewire the mind during hard times to, manifest things and achieve great things. And I'm curious, like, how has this experience like changed you as far as like compassion for the people who listen to your content, given the fact that you've gone through exactly what they've gone through? How has it, what has it taught you about the human mind and the body and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say was that there was definitely a long period of time where I couldn't manifest. I just kind of had to survive. I had to like lean into the resilience that I had. And a lot of that time, it felt like I had drained it to the bottom of the bucket and I didn't have any resilience left. And so I had to take things like very gently and very slowly. Like I said, I had a supportive community around me. There's a lot of stuff I understand about how stress works in the body and the mind that maybe, not everybody has that depth of knowledge. So yeah, I have a huge amount of empathy for people that have to struggle through things like this alone, or, can't really make sense of what's going on in their brain and their body. And that's absolutely the reason that I wrote the book, and that I decided to record the audiobook myself, even though that's like super hard work. I nearly lost my voice after about 2 days, is because I feel passionately about sharing what I learned with people. I was never going to come out and just tell a sad personal story. I was only ever going to share if I felt like I had learned, with the benefit of hindsight, things that could help other people. And, there are so many things about our senses, our intuition, our creativity, the benefits of nature, the benefits of tribe, so much ancient wisdom that, I love, that I got to dig into and really bring back, just to remind people this stuff was always there. Like, our ancestors knew it. And there's just such beautiful, simple things that we can do to be more resilient, to get over adversity, and not feel alone and feel seen through that. I think that's really important. I think a lot of people feel like they're just grappling on their own in the darkness, and the future feels so uncertain. You don't know if you'll ever be okay again. And I really hope that stories like mine and yours help people to see that is possible. And if that's the one thing that keeps them going, I think that's just such a gift.
In our first conversation, we talked about a lot about manifestation, and you said one of the pillars of that is gratitude, and that you should start your day with gratitude. You should live and breathe gratitude. How has your framework for turning hardship into manifestation changed since writing this book, or is what you know about it still the same?
I would say it's evolved. So you're right. I think I did used to say, start your day with 10 things you're grateful for. That now feels like quite a basic practice. I feel one of the things I learned is that when I was really at rock bottom, which was quite a few times, and I just thought, I don't know, how I'm ever going to feel better, how I'm going to navigate this. It's not just in my mind and emotions. There's a lot of practical things that change when you become a widow and, you're living alone, and you have to rethink your finances and your future and everything. And it took me a while to get quicker at remembering this. But I remember once sitting in a taxi, just feeling in absolute despair and thinking, okay, now is the time to say 10 things I'm grateful for. Not when I'm happy, not when I've just woken up in the morning and my troubles haven't really hit me yet. But when I feel at my lowest, if I said in my mind or wrote down 10 things I'm grateful for, it changed my mindset so quickly. It was it was just like a revelation. So I tried to remember that more when I needed to in the moment. And, I think it has an effect on your nervous system, where the stress of the cortisol keeps you in that sort of fight-flight state. But gratitude goes along with the bonding hormone oxytocin, which is more about love and trust and joy and excitement. And that has a sort of seesaw effect with the cortisol. So it naturally just reduces your stress and makes you feel, more in this sort of love and abundant state. And then on top of that, I would add that this appreciation of beauty does exactly the same thing, the way that it works in the brain and the body. So, if you're going for a walk and instead of just keeping your head down and kind of not noticing the things around you, because we just, we get habituated, we get used to everything that's around us, like the sky and the trees, actually really making the point of saying, I see this amazing architecture in this building, or I notice the bird song, or I stop and smell some flowers. It's all ways of resetting your nervous system and pushing yourself more into love and trust. And I almost feel like it works best when you're at your lowest. It has the biggest change effect compared to if you practice it on a regular basis, like I used to say before.
Yeah, and I think you bring up something that I don't remember if we talked about this in our first conversation or not, but it's worth bringing up again, where when people are in the thick of it and they're trying to get out on the other side, there's this level of cognitive dissonance that can exist with some of the manifestation language where you're telling yourself these positive affirmations and yet your life is crap. And it's like, well, wait a second. Like, like in your instance, like my husband just died. Like, is my life really that good? Am I that amazing? Right? Like, it doesn't make sense to me right now. And I think that becomes a problem because it just makes it that much harder, I think, to get out of a hard situation and actually get the thing that you want, because now, you're essentially telling yourself that you're lying to yourself because of the way you're in a way, right? So like, how can people, I guess, bridge that to where they're being grateful and optimistic, and then they're like taking some level of action to actually make it make sense that they're going on the right path? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I think I probably need to be very clear about the sorts of things I was saying I was grateful for. So you're absolutely right. With the background of my husband having lost his life when he didn't, he would have wanted to live, obviously. I wasn't saying I've got an amazing life, but I was saying I'm grateful that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I have my health. I'm grateful for the supportive community that I have around me. I'm grateful that I have time to walk in nature. I mean, it wasn't like my life's amazing and I'm manifesting everything at all. I think I want to separate those things. I think you're absolutely right. What you're grateful for, it has to be honest and real. Because if it's like toxic positivity, that's not going to help you at all. Um, and equally, this idea of whether you then use that positive mental state to manifest is, if you're ready, if you've got spare resources, if you feel like you even have the energy to take action to manifest, great. I didn't feel like that. I didn't try to manifest for at least 2 years. I just tried to heal. I just tried to reset my nervous system. I just tried to offset the damage that I knew that this amount of stress would be doing to my brain and my body. I just tried to stay healthy. And, I didn't even try it because I couldn't. I didn't try to be there for my friends as much as I needed them. I accepted that this was the few years of my life where I needed to lean on the people that love me, who have kept doing that for so long. And, when I felt like, if you come to me with, something that you want to share and I can actually support you, I felt like, great, I'm becoming a bit like my old self again. That's wonderful. But if I can't sustain that for now, that's also okay. So I think your question's really valid, because what I want to say is that I'm not encouraging people to try to live their best life when they're going through adversity. I'm trying to encourage people to find themselves again and know that there will be a point where they can get back to that, but there's no rush. And it's about truly healing. It's not about rushing it.
Yeah, what I was getting at wasn't like you specifically. It was more like, there's a lot of talk, about the power of affirmations. And when you're like having a bad day, you're going through it, just to like, put sticky notes on your mirror and, pump yourself up. And I think that there's obviously there's time for that. There's times for that. And that can be helpful. I just have learned in my own experience and talking to other people, and I'm sure it was the case for you. Like, if you were to do that, like, there would be some level of like sadness because you're like, well, this isn't real. Like, I don't feel amazing right now. I don't feel successful because of this thing that I lost or this thing that I'm going through. And then, but then on the other side of that, you have to maintain this level of optimism to get through hard times. And it's just like this hard dance. Um, do you think that people, in order to start manifesting again out of a place of despair, do they have to like start achieving small wins and making small momentum to start to kind of rewire their brain to prove to itself that it's on that upward trajectory again?
Yeah, so I just want to say that the affirmation that I had on my bathroom mirror for the longest time was, there's no way she isn't going to make it through. So it was that, that's not, I'm going to be amazingly successful. That's just, however hard it feels today, I'm going to make it through. And that was the affirmation that I needed. And then there was just one day that I woke up and I was like, that's about getting through obstacles and barriers. I don't need that anymore. And I threw it away and I put something more positive. But it took me years to get to that place. But you're absolutely right. The little micro habits and micro wins, that's what you can do in the meantime that just keeps you going. So you don't look back and think, oh, I've just wasted years of my life. I mean, there's part of me that feels that I've lost some years of my life. I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to, travel or function in the way that I wish I could have in the last 3 or 4 years. But you're right. I did small things. I started doing, more and more exercise. I started enjoying cooking again. I started, building back up my social life. I started traveling again. I did the odd podcast, but then if I felt like, this is too much, this is getting too much too soon for me, I had the wisdom to withdraw again for a while. So yeah, and I think that could be different for different people. I think for some people, you're right, some mini manifestations could actually make you feel like, yeah, I'm still moving forward. And then you just build them up to, bigger and bigger manifestations. Like I said, I spent a year kind of at home on my own in my onesie writing the book. It didn't really feel like I was manifesting that much as I went along. But obviously at the end of it, at one point, it's done and it's a book that's going to be out there. And that's actually really big. So I think sometimes you only appreciate these things when you look back as well.
You brought up some really amazing points in that it's so important just to meet yourself where you're at and kind of just be real. Cause I think at the end of the day, what people want to know is am I going to be okay? Am I going to survive this? So I think what you wrote on that for your bathroom mirror is awesome within that context. And also just the small wins and getting back into what gives you peace and joy. I want to go back to the art of noticing and paying attention to signs because, I think we all have signs all over the place when we're walking through when we're walking through life or in nature and stuff. And sometimes we pay attention to the wrong ones. We miss the good ones. How can we get better at utilizing our brain to filter through, to pay attention for the right signs and to pick up on things that actually are going to move the needle for us?
Yeah, so I think probably the single biggest thing that's changed since we last spoke is that in the source, I was very much like, your brain is capable of all of this. You should be in the driving seat. And it felt very empowering. But I think for me, having the experience of the biggest thing that has mattered to me in my life was that my husband should live. And that didn't happen. And that made me question everything. And so I think the biggest single thing that I've come out of that thinking differently is that it's not all down to me. I can't control everything. I couldn't beat leukemia. And that's made me believe in something greater. And I don't know exactly what that is. So for some people, it would be God. For some people, it would be source or the universe or, or if you want to be more psychological about it, the collective consciousness. But whatever it is, signs are tapping into that something greater. So it's kind of like surrendering and I'll come back to how our brain can be trained to notice signs, but it's also about saying these signs are coming from somewhere. I like to just call it beyond, but it could be any of the things that I just said. And so it's believing in that other thing and engaging with that will help you to receive signs. But equally, the brain has this filtering system, right? So if you tell your brain certain things that you want to notice or manifest, and that's where in the past I've spoken about vision boards and action boards. There's sort of a passive and a more active way you can do this. So you can just say, I believe that God or the universe or angels will send me signs and just wait for them to happen. Or you can identify what you believe to be certain signs that you would like to see. So a lot of people believe that robins are a sign that loved ones are near. But for me, because that was my husband's name, it's even more meaningful. So that's definitely a sign for me. But, you may have a special number that means something to you, or you may have a symbol that is important to you or reminds you of someone that you've lost. It's not all about loss. So there may be something that symbolizes for you that moment that you decided to go down the path of exercising and, not using compared to how you were before. that shows up as a symbol for you. And you can ask for that. You can say, this, for me, it was like a phoenix, like rising from the flames, because I felt so burnt out. And so I specifically asked for that symbol, and I ended up on the second anniversary of Robin passing, flying through Phoenix, Arizona, even though I was meant to fly direct to LA, and like repeatedly seeing this Chinese restaurant called the Phoenix Garden. So I think it's either about engaging with this something greater and just asking for it to guide you, or you can ask for specific signs and then go about your day, spend time in nature, and see what comes to you.
You said something that I want to touch on, and we may have already covered this in this conversation, but you said something about like you couldn't like change the leukemia diagnosis, right? Um, and I'm curious, like, what was the process like for you, given how much you talk about manifesting and reinvention and changing, like that when you knew you just couldn't save your husband, like, what was that like for you?
It was the worst feeling in the world. It was totally devastating. It wasn't even just about losing him. It was the fact that everything I had believed in up until that point was wrong, didn't work. Um, I had to find a completely different way of just viewing life. At the same time as dealing with a particular grief, which was the person that I was closest to. So yeah, I mean, it made me question everything, and I went through the typical grief curve. I felt very angry about it for a while, but it was in that moment that I thought I could go down the road of being angry and bitter for the rest of my life, and I choose not to. But based on that choice, I then had to find a way of how I believe that the world works when everything that I thought prior to that had gone wrong. I mean, I remember there was about a month where we weren't sure what the diagnosis was. We were seeing lymphoma doctors, and then one Friday afternoon, when we were due to go and see the lymphoma doctor in London on the Monday, and we were not living in London, so we had to travel quite far, the doctor emailed me and said, I need to speak to you on your own, but obviously we have to get Robin's permission for that, which he gave straight away. And so the doctor said to me, I need to tell you that the diagnosis is not lymphoma, it's leukemia. So don't come to see me on Monday. Go to the hospital in London, and he needs to start treatment straight away. So I went round to tell him. And he immediately said to me, well, it's been the happiest 5.5 years of my life. And I said to him, I love you so much. I wish this was happening to me. I wish I could take it away from you. And he said, I love you that much too. But, you can't do that. You can't choose that. And you can go to the best hospitals and get all the opinions and the treatment, and it doesn't necessarily work. And that, unfortunately, is life. And I found it really hard to let go. I couldn't let go. Even when he was given 2 weeks to live, I still thought by some miracle that something could change. And I had to accept that that was the case in my case. And yeah, I mean, that's been incredibly hard.
I can't imagine how challenging that must have been, is to essentially like come to terms with the fact that everything you had believed about life up until that point was wrong, and that you've probably felt betrayed and lied to and all the things. And I think that that's what trips people up, is they fall into this trap of the world is against me and everything I do, I'm going to fail at, because somehow there's things going on in the world that are conspiring to make sure that I don't achieve any kind of happiness, success, fulfillment. And then they play into that because the story is there, right? Like your story, you could have essentially rode that story for the next 10 years and not done anything, and told like the story of your husband passing, and people would have had compassion and felt sorry for you and stuff like that, because that's just like the human condition. And yet that keeps you stuck, because now you're just like getting this influx of validation, like, oh, like, see, my life is bad. Like, I don't have to move forward. How do people like shift their mind and break free from that trap so that they can move forward and they're not convinced that the world is against them?
I think that's the $1,000,000 question. I feel I want to be very, very careful how I say this, because I don't want to judge anyone's emotions and how they deal with their adversity, because it is incredibly challenging. But I felt at a certain point that there was a choice for me. There was a choice of whether I took antidepressants or not. There was a choice of whether I was bitter for the rest of my life or not. And I completely get that people would say it was unfair that I lost my husband, but I didn't think that. I thought things happen to people in life. This was the one that had to happen to me. I don't understand why, but I'm not going to let it define the rest of my life. I'm not going to let it change me. People say things like, you'll never be the same again after you go through an experience like this, or, various other experiences. I chose that I wanted to be myself again. There are a lot of narratives around grief and loss and tragedy that I challenged in my mind. I thought, why does it have to be like that? I don't want it to be like that. And I think I'm really only sharing now because if there's one person out there that makes a choice that helps their life to be better because of anything that I've said, then that's even, more powerful than me just choosing to do it for myself. And I feel really strongly like that's why you share your story as well. So I think it's just to say that it is very hard. It does feel unfair. It's okay to be angry, but also there are certain forks in the road where you can make some choices that actually might make you happier in the end, or might make you heal, come to a place of resolution and healing where you might not have been able to.
And I can only speak from my own experience as well. And also the people that I've talked to, throughout the course of my life. And I'm sure that the people you've talked to throughout the course of your life, it's like when you're going through uncertainty or hard times, you lose somebody, something troublesome happens in your life. The main things that I think people want are, am I going to be okay? Am I going to feel happy again? Am I going to feel joy? Am I going to see success? That's what people want. They want to know, am I going to survive this? And you bring up the word choice. And again, I don't think there's certain things obviously that are out of people's control. They're not making certain choices for their life to be that way. However, if you want to sincerely change your life and get the things that you want your happiness back, you want your success back, you want joy, you want love, you have to control your choices. There's no, other way around that. You have to make the right decisions. And it's a really hard truth for people to hear, because when you feel like the world is against you, you play into that victim mentality where everything is everybody else's fault. And you no longer have any kind of autonomy in the way you live your life. And when people hear, well, you have to change your choices, you're like, oh, are you saying that the way my life is my fault? And it's like, well, no. It's the famous Will Smith quote. It's it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility to fix it, or something like that. And yeah, and it's if you want your life to get better, then you have to change your choices. If you don't, then that's totally fine. But you're going to be that person 5 to 10 years from now. It's gosh, I wish I would have started this sooner. And, everybody has different timelines and stuff, but it just starts with that hard conversation of acknowledging that you don't want to be this version of yourself anymore. I think anybody you talk to who's had any kind of real transformation or made a change, they got sick of being that person. There's a reason that there's a phrase in the 12-step community that's I got sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? I mean, that's the thing. And yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you just said.
I think you raise another really important point, which is about, I think part of resilience is being okay with ambiguity, okay not knowing what's going to happen in the future. And I think for some reason I naturally was able to do that. I just thought, I don't know how long this is going to take. I don't know how my life's going to pan out now. But but I just kind of just took it one day at a time. And, I have learned from past experience, like when I got divorced from my first marriage, I let that victim mentality play out for like years and years and years. And when I finally looked back and, with a different perspective, I thought, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to waste that amount of time, like kind of just dwelling in the negativity. I've learned I won't do that in future. But then I get this devastating blow that I didn't expect, which was my husband dying rather than, getting divorced. And it's taken time again. I've definitely learned from what happened before that there's an element of dragging it out and kind of, really just feeling sorry for yourself, that you can stretch out, or you can choose to move on from. Easier said than done, obviously, but another part of resilience is learning from, maybe things you've done in the past that aren't the way that you wish, you had done it, or that you would do it again. So yeah, I think I agree with everything that you've said, but I also want to add in, I think another point is it's okay to not know what the future's going to be like. You've got to be okay with that at some points.
How do people get better at that?
I mean, I used to be quite a sort of, very structured person that would plan everything out and not really like it if something went out of the plan. And I've just learned over time that that's actually not always the best way. And the people who are more spontaneous and flexible, that there are advantages to the way that they live. So, for example, my best friend Bryony, she's very spontaneous and flexible, and she's great in a crisis. And I've spent a lot of time with her and kind of tried to learn from the way that she does things. Whereas before I would have maybe said, oh, well, I plan everything out and she's a bit last minute. But actually I've appreciated how she thinks and works that's different to me, and what's better about that. And even in the first few weeks of my grief, when I started doing these nature walks, and then I thought, well, it's not like I'm really doing much else, so I'll go for longer and longer. I started taking turns that, going down paths I'd never been down before. And I've got a terrible sense of direction, so I don't normally do that. And I was living in the countryside, so it was a place where I could walk for miles and not see someone else and, get completely lost. I think it was an analogy for me of thinking, mentally, I'm going to have to go down roads now where I don't know where they lead. And I don't know if they're going to take me further away from where I want to be or need to be, or if they're going to bring me back, to home, to a safe place. I don't know if someone's going to be able to help me along the way. I've never actually realized this until saying it to you now, but I think taking myself down those paths was a way of kind of training my brain for not knowing where I'm going and being okay with that.
They say that marriage ends in two ways: death or divorce. Which one has been harder? Which one has been harder for you to deal with?
Do you know what's really interesting is, because one of my closest friends was getting divorced at the same time that Robin had just passed away, and she drove from London with bags and bags of groceries, came and spent some time with me and said, I feel so bad even telling you about my divorce because what's happened to you is so much worse. And I said to her, having been divorced before, whatever the reasons are, there's always a level of feeling like a failure or you were rejected in some way that affects your self-esteem and your self-confidence. When the person dies, you can actually believe that they would have loved you forever. You haven't been rejected in the same way that you feel, when a marriage ends through divorce. So although the pain of losing the physical presence of that person, the pain of knowing that they died way before their time when they would have wanted to live and be with you is terrible, you can still feel completely loved by that person, and it doesn't affect your value of yourself in the same way that a divorce does. So I think for the person that survives, it's not devastating to you in terms of like who you believe you are. It's devastating for the other person.
That's a really interesting perspective. And I guess that makes a lot of sense, because if you think about like when people are grieving the loss of a loved one, it's like deep sadness of like, there's like something missing of like, man, like I really miss this person. I love this person. And obviously if somebody gets divorced, obviously that exists too. But like with divorce comes like you said, the shattered self-esteem, the anger, the bitter like, towards that person, not towards like just life, which I think then creates a whole other um, subset of issues, when you're like living in the world, because you still have like all this pain that exists, and that person is still like living, where you may see them, you may see a post, there's part of them is still like attached to you somehow. And so that was a really interesting way of looking at it. Because I'm sure there is like the piece there that's like, I mean, because somebody dies of leukemia, right? Like in your situation, there's nothing you could have done, right? You get divorced, there may have been something you could have done, right? So it's like that you live with that, I think, for the rest of your life.
And I just want to say as well that, in terms of healing and learning and everything that we've discussed, that I'm actually now very close to my first husband and his family. And not the first Christmas after Robin passed away, but the second one, he invited me to go to South Africa and spend Christmas with him and his fiance. And I said, please put her on the phone, because I can't say yes to this if I don't know that she's okay with it. And she said, please, please, we want you to come. And when I did go and spend Christmas with them, she shared with me that her previous partner had passed away. And she said to me, I can never see him again, but Fritz can see you, and I could never stand in the way of that. And I just appreciate that so much. So, like we've said, there are different ways of looking at death or divorce, or, whether someone can be physically present in your life or not. And yeah, I've learned many things in the last 4 years, but one of them is just how incredibly kind people can be. And that's just, one example of that.
It's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing that. I think people will really appreciate like hearing the goodness that still exists in the world. Today we've talked about exercise, and I'm curious, like as it relates to like health and wellness and the intuition, which a lot of people, I guess, connect to the gut, trust your gut, right? Like how does health and wellness and gut health like relate to your ability to authentically trust your intuition and manifest things?
Yeah. So again, a bit of an evolution from the last time we spoke, where I guess we would have talked about the gut brain axis and how, they're connected in both directions. Now we actually know that it's a three-way system. So the gut microbiome, which is the trillions of good bacteria in your gastrointestinal system, and the brain, and that they communicate mostly through the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve that comes from the skull through the lungs into the diaphragm and into the gut, but also other nerves in the gut called enteric nerves, plus hormones and cytokine messages, which are other sorts of chemicals that get secreted into the blood and either go through the blood-brain barrier from the gut or the gut microbiome to the brain, or vice versa. So there's a really intricate communication going on here. And all of the things that we know benefit our general health, like our obviously diet, affects the gut, and that nutrition gets to the brain. But physical exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, has a beneficial effect on the gut bacteria too. We don't actually quite understand how that works, but the oxygenation of the blood that goes to the brain, that's clear. But there's also a beneficial effect on the gut bacteria. So if your gut bacteria are in a good condition, so a good quality and good quantity, then that just leans into this three-way communication, where neurons from the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and then deeper, nerves in the gut which all hold our, our wisdom and patterns and life lessons that we picked up that we don't consciously remember, are just able to operate at their best. So it's basically staying hydrated, not being sedentary, doing some gentle aerobic exercise or breath work, eating 30 different plant products per week. And that's not as hard as it sounds. That includes spices, coffee, black pepper, dark chocolate. And for example, if you eat tomatoes of different colors, they count as different plant products as well. Fermented foods are really good for your gut. So, it's quite hard to directly access your brain, but going through the gut and the gut microbiome is the best way to keep that form of communication really positive, and therefore allow you to access your gut instinct.
That's obviously a really good like ritual or habit for people to do on a daily or weekly basis in order to keep like themselves like healthy. And I know we've also talked about like nature and finding something greater than themselves. We've talked about the power of community. Like, are there any like other like rituals that come to mind on a daily or weekly basis that people should do to be able to like tap into their senses and manifest what they want?
Yeah, so that's pretty much covered everything apart from one major section that I would like to describe, which is from an area of research called neuroaesthetics, which is about art and beauty and creativity. And so if you think about it, when we lived in the caves, we didn't have spare resources to do stuff for fun, like it was all about survival. But we did cave art, we danced, we drummed, we walked barefoot in nature, we stared at the stars in the sky at night. And so, why did we do these creative things like art and adorning ourselves and creating tools that were more beautiful and symmetrical than they needed to be to actually do the job that they needed to do? So, art has been part of humanity forever. And, there's even a question that I've raised in the book, which is art what makes us human? So clearly there is a survival advantage to indulging in creativity. And what neuroaesthetics says is that there's both making and beholding. So you could draw, or you could go to an art gallery. You could dance in your living room, or you could go to watch the ballet, etc. And there are actually like longevity benefits to indulging in the arts. But I think the most beautiful part that I like about it in terms of overcoming adversity, as we're really talking about, is that it doesn't matter how good you are. Just doing a drawing or a painting or singing in the shower, it benefits you. It benefits your mental health, your physical health, and your longevity. So I think that's a really important, simple addition that people can bring into their lives as well.
And like for the people that are like skeptical about some of the stuff that we're talking about, like what is your like elevator pitch to them that this is all backed by science?
I think, when you become a doctor, there's what's called a Hippocratic oath, which is do no harm. And of all the things that we've discussed, time in nature, creativity, engaging with your community, tuning into your senses, honing your intuition, more physicality in your life, none of those things are going to harm you. Asking for a sign, the worst thing that can happen is that nothing comes. So I just would say to people, why not try some of these things? I can tell you that they've massively benefited my life. I have dug into the science of near-death experiences and how intuition works and how creativity benefits the brain. And, it's all in the book. But yeah, just there's no harm in trying these things. That's the bottom line.
Well, let's just say somebody starts to try these things and they start to think that they're manifesting things and they're on the right path. Like, how can somebody actually, like, what are some of the signs that someone is actually on the right path and they're not like going down the path that might lead them to another failure?
I think what you mentioned earlier about sort of like micro wins along the way, so if you set out your manifestation goals, there's obviously some that are bigger and maybe harder to achieve and might take longer. And then there are ones that, you might be able to sort of tick off quite quickly. So I think going with that, seeing like what is working and then like holding yourself accountable and sense checking, like, is this the right path? I think this is where community comes in as really important, having friends as a sounding board. I do a lot of like walk and talks with my friends. And so, we'll go somewhere in nature and we'll, be really honest with each other about what we're trying to manifest, and we'll challenge each other. Yeah, I think we're not meant to be alone. I think community is a huge, huge part of this. But obviously things like journaling can help us to self, check if we're on the right path as well. And then, I know that this is the sort of more out there end of this conversation, but for me, signs are a way of knowing if I'm on the right path or not. And that level of surrender to something greater has not just brought me comfort and guidance in a tough time, but it brings me joy, and it makes me feel connected in a way that I, didn't feel as much before.
What's been a sign you've seen recently that's reassured you you're on the right path?
I have to say, because I think I mentioned I'm in LA at the moment, I'm seeing so many hearts at the moment, like on the pavement, or, like heart-shaped items. So that to me is a more general one about living a life that's guided by love, and just, yeah. Well, actually, let me share something that happened in LA. So I went to a store that I really like, which I first discovered I had seen someone in London wearing something that I really liked. So I'd approached her and asked about it. And so I knew about this store online. And then I suddenly saw it in LA when I was here a couple of years ago, and then found out that there's actually a store very close to where I live in London. I popped into that store when I first got here last week. And the guy in the store remembered me. We had a bit of a chat. I didn't buy anything. I had just left the store. And the manager came running after me, calling out, Dr. Tara, Dr. Tara. And she basically said to me, I totally love your work. You've changed my life. I'm going to cry, and then cried and said, it's a conversation for another time, but you had a really profound impact on my life. And then said to me, we'd love to gift you some clothes for doing all the podcasts that you're doing for your book promotion. And so I went back the next day, and she, helped me to find some outfits, which she's given me. And, we've messaged each other, and she's just said, I love you so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to dress you. And I do think that first day that I was walking back to my hotel with a dress that I was going to wear to a podcast the next day, I do remember thinking, Robin's made this happen because he wanted me to receive a gift, because he can, no longer physically give me gifts. And he was like so generous in life. So yeah, I think noticing all those hearts, and then literally having this person saying, I love you, and like giving me a gift, which is similar to something that Robin would have got me. Yeah, that's how I experience life now.
What a way to end the conversation. Tara, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, for being so vulnerable. If people want to get a copy of the book or pre-order it, like, where's the best place to do all that?
So the book, The New Science of How to Trust Your Instincts, it's going to be available from September 16th in hardback and audiobook and ebook. So obviously it's on Amazon, but it'll be in all major bookstores in the UK and the US. And if you look on my Instagram, Dr. Tara Swart, DR, and then my name, then there's a link to all the various booksellers, because I want to be, really fair about people being able to buy the book from anywhere that they want to.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much once again for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much. No, I'm so happy to come back on the show. And thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you. That means a lot.